following program sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
About money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth, and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
So it's Friday afternoon. We're going to be talking about money. So now with the Republican and the Democrat conventions over, I thought I'd ask a question. Who was the only nominee of a major political party, Democrat or Republican, the only nominee of a major political party who not only did not receive a single electoral college vote, but who also lost his wife, lost the election, lost his money, lost his mind, and lost his life? Who was the only one? Well, I'll come back to that later in the program, so don't go away. 57% of men and women today worry about whether they're going to have enough money to make it to the end of life. We're going to come back to that question too. And for all of those that are 71 and older, 25% are worried that they won't have enough money to retire or to continue their retirement. Big concern. What to do? Going to talk about that. Plus, I have something new to announce at the end of the program. So don't go away. We've got a lot to cover. I've got a great guest today. So we've got a lot to cover. Let's get started. For 7 years, I've talked about a couple themes. One of those themes is the supercycle. Standard Chartered Bank did a study 7 years ago in which they said there were times in our history, the world history, when the world GDP grew faster than average, significantly faster than average. Now, Standard Chartered Bank is a large bank out of the UK. They spent significant time. A lot of people bought into this idea. And then in the last couple of years, it's kind of drifted away and people have gone away from it. I still believe the theme holds true, and I'm going to tell you why I think it holds true and why it's going to make a difference. So what is it? Let me review what it is. They said there were periods of time in our history when the average GDP of the world, not just one country, not just one area, but of the world, grew faster than average. The first of those times was 1870 to 1913. The 43 years during that period of time, world GDP grew faster than average, primarily driven by the industrialization of the United States. Yes, the U.S. and the world went through a financial crisis. We started in 1874, but there was a very, very big shift from agriculture to an industrial society, something that drives us today, that was to take us from this small middling country in the 1800s to a world power by the early part of the century. It was the beginning of industrialization. It was a powerful growth. It was difficult. There were business cycles, and we managed to emerge from that as the world leader. The second cycle, 1945 to 1970, driven primarily by the rebuilding of Europe. World War II had ended. Then it was time to put together and rebuild Europe. It was a relatively benign period of time for business cycles, but it was a time in which we saw a tremendous amount of growth here. We saw the interstate highway system. We saw the development of the airline system. The Dow, during that period of time, went from 100 to 1,000. So it was a time as well, the death of the colonial system. The British Empire had colonies, Portugal, Spain. All those countries had colonies. It was the death of the colony system. Those colonies became independent countries. And it was also the time of the Cold War. So Standard Chartered Bank said in 2009, we began a new supercycle. It was one in which the winners would be global. It was one that was going to be driven by the emerging nations, by what they were doing. The Chinas, the India, Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, Turkey, Sub-Saharan Africa. There was talk about the BRIC countries. Not really a valid thing, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it was also it'll be a time of big risk, and I think we're living through one of those times, and we're seeing some of those things happen in Brazil. We're seeing them in Russia. We're seeing times of turmoil in the Middle East. It's a time in which politicians make a very big difference as well. But every supercycle has its losses. If you look back at that first supercycle when we were transitioning from an agricultural society to an industrial society, we had a lot of losses on the agricultural time. But during that time, the economic momentum is upward. It's upward. It's not flat. It's not down. It's an economic time that's upward, and it's a powerful time. If you look at what's been happening in the world since 2009, we've had a very powerful growth. Yeah, we've had setbacks, and we're going through one of those setbacks. But we saw those setbacks in the 1945 to 1970 time period. We saw those setbacks during that 1870 to 1913 time period too. But it's been a difficult time recently for emerging markets. It's been a difficult time when you watch what's happened with oil, with commodities. But, when you look at where the supercycle is, it's going to be driven by those emerging countries. And why do we say the emerging countries? Because the forecast is that by the year 2030, 93% of the world's middle class will be living in those emerging countries. 93% of the world's middle class. What does that mean? A middle class, what is the middle class? Those are people that are moving from subsistence, out of poverty, into actually becoming consumers. So let me give you a picture of what's happened on poverty. Going back almost 200 years, going back to 1820, 94% of the world, including the U.S., 94% of the world was living in poverty. Poverty defined as earning $3.10 per day. In today's dollars, $3.10. Not back then, but in today's dollars, $3.10 a day. That's $1,000 a year. That's poverty. In 1820, the average wage in the U.S. was $19 per month in today's dollars. Not their dollars, but today's dollars. $19 a month. That's people living on $228 per year. You can understand. Life expectancy was 37 years. Most of the people were on farms. They were raising their own food. They were sewing their own clothes. Half the people lived in rural areas where there were less than 2,500 people in the town and on the farms. Life for shoes. What they had for shoes were cobbled together. They would take a measurement of the length of the foot. They would send that off and get back a pair of shoes. And there was no right foot or left foot. The same shoe fit either right or left. That was the kind of shoe that they wore in the U.S. in 1820. It was a very, very difficult time. What they ate for dinner was pretty similar. They ate chicken stew, dumplings, mashed potatoes, biscuits, and honey. There were no salads, very few fruit. It was a time in which things were very difficult. 1870 didn't find a lot of difference, but by 1870, only 87% of the world's population lived in poverty, including the U.S., from 94% to 87% of the world living in poverty, living at $3.10 a day or less. $3.10 a day or less in today's dollars. $1,000 a day, $1,000 a year. Think about that. That's not much. Life expectancy had gone from 37 years in 1820 to 44 and was interrupted a lot of times by smallpox or by cholera or tuberculosis or yellow fever. the medical kits that doctors carried in those days? You see the little black bags that you see doctors carry in the movies? You know the real black bags, what they had? There were saws, there were hammers, because a lot of the instruments and medical equipment consisted of what you needed to do to amputate a leg or an arm or a finger or whatever it might be. That was real medical equipment. It wasn't what we see on TV. But the U.S. was beginning to move from poverty to the middle class. It would happen during that time period from 1870 to 1913. And by 1915, the rest of the world, 82% were in poverty. And the U.S. was beginning to move out of that. Wages had increased to $1,341 per month by 1915. Think about that increase from 1870, where the average wage was $292 per month, to $1,341. Significant increase. Think about that. We have a minimum wage in this U.S. of $7.25. The average wage in 1915 was almost $8. We're going to come back to this whole thing after the commercial break, so don't go away. But the life expectancy by 1915 had expanded to 53 years, and there's more to come, so don't go away.
About Money with Mike Adams will resume in a moment on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Did you know the 20-year annualized S&P return was 8.19%, while the 20-year annualized return for the average equity mutual fund investor was just 4.67%? That's a gap of 3.52%. It doesn't sound like much now, but it could mean the difference between retiring in comfort and running out of money. For some seniors, a gap that large could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars and cut their retirement short. Don't run out of money. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today, 206-903-1019, and learn more about how you can, 1, create wealth for retirement, and 2, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
KKOL. We're back with more about money. For details on what you hear on today's show, visit adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Now, here again is Mike Adams.
So I've been talking about poverty in relation to the supercycle. And took you back 200 years to 1820, where the average wage in the U.S. was $228 per year. In today's dollars, think about $228 per year. People had shoes that were nondescript, which fit either foot. It was a time in which people lived in poverty. The average life expectancy, 37 years old. But by 1870, things had begun to change. The United States began to move from an agricultural nation to an industrial nation. In 1870, 1 out of every 5 people lived in the cities. By 1915, 4 out of every 5 lived. In 1870, the average wage was $292 a month in today's dollars. By 1915, it had increased 6-fold, 6 times over to $1,341. You know, people talk about how wages have been stagnant for a couple decades. Think about that time. They increased in real dollars 6-fold to an average of $8 per hour. That's higher than our current minimum wage. Shoes, you know, from those nondescript shoes, now there were right and left shoes, and you've seen pictures of the pointy shoes and the shoes with the lace up. They were no longer just pieces of leather thrown together. They were being manufactured, hand sewn and hand carried, but through factories. They were actually building, shoes, manufacturing shoes. Life expectancy had gone from 37 years to 57 years. But there was more to go, because by 1945, while 73% of the world was still in poverty, as we began that second supercycle, Europe began to rebuild. But the big decline came during that time from 1960, the part at the end of the second supercycle, to today. The number of people living in poverty dropped from 1945, 73%, to just over 20% today. So what does that mean? If you look at what happened in that first supercycle, when wages grew sixfold, that's happening in the rest of the world today. People's wages are increasing very, very significantly. And what does that mean? Instead of subsistence, instead of living on their gardens and the food that they're raising, instead of sewing their clothes, they're becoming people that buy lattes. They buy cars. They are moving from subsistence to becoming consumers. And that is a demand which drives GDP and drives business expansion. So when we talk about the second supercycle, or the third supercycle, we're talking about this period of time that began in 2009, when we're seeing a dramatic increase in salaries increasing in the rest of the world. And those salaries are driving consumerism. And if you look at the United States, where we stand with consumer portion of the GDP, our GDP, 70% is consumers buying products. 70%. So when you think about the rest of the world, when their wages are increasing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-fold during the next 10 or 15 years, think about what that's doing. Right now we live in a time where a credit bubble burst, and I've talked about that a number of times on the program. The credit bubble burst. We have oil coming down. We have commodities coming down. We have private equity coming down. We have the emerging nations, those stock markets have caved in because of this whole thing of many of these countries are dependent on commodities. They haven't consumed less, but they're finding that the prices are lower. They're finding less money is coming into the country because prices are lower, but demand hasn't fallen off. If you look at oil prices have come down very, very significantly. From over $100 a barrel, they've come down to the 40s because there was an overcapacity problem. We're coming to the end of that overcapacity. And by the end of this year, maybe by early next year, mid next year, we're going to see supply and demand essentially in equilibrium. A lot of storage to work off because we've been storing it in all the storage facilities. It's stored in ships floating around sea. But as that capacity works off, we're going to start to see oil prices rise. We're going to see some of these other commodity prices rise. Steel, an overcapacity of 600 metric tons per year. That's beginning to work itself off. You look around Seattle and see the building that's going on, see the rest of the country that's doing. Demand is increasing. Prices are really good. But as things come around, we're going to see the international aspect of this whole thing. Emerging markets are going to drive the world economy. And yet, this whole concept has driven this whole thing. And I hardly go to, there's not a conference I go to, hardly ever, where they don't talk about international investing. But think about what the real implications of that are. We're going to be in a super cycle that is growing very, very rapidly, where world GDP is going to grow faster than normal. And that means that those countries are going to see their GDPs grow faster. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the companies within that are going to grow faster. There was a study that was done by Goldman Sachs showing that the BRIC companies, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, were going to have a much greater speed of growth in their economies, GDP. But Credit Suisse did an analysis, and they looked at GDP in countries from 1972 to 2009, and they ranked by GDP the growth for periods of the preceding 5 years. By investing in the stock markets of the highest growth companies, you could get an average of 18.4%. But investing in the lowest growth companies, a growth of 25.1%. GDP and the stock market have a relationship, but it's not a one-for-one. A faster GDP growth does not mean a faster stock market growth. If anything, we've seen that in what's happened with our stock market this year. It's not the total GDP that counts. It's how the companies within those countries are doing. For me, I believe it makes sense to have international exposure. For me, I think it doesn't depend upon investing in those foreign countries. I believe it's investing in domestically domiciled countries, those that are from the U.S., but have significant international exposure, where a significant portion of their revenues are coming from their business overseas. And you don't have to look far to see that in the U.S. You don't have to look very far to see that with companies here in Seattle. They have international exposure. They're going to have the kind of growth coming in. There's going to be a demand for that. And I believe it's safer to do that. You don't take the political risk. You don't take the economic risk of being in one of those countries. Not a risk of being in Russia or Brazil or India or China or Indonesia or Turkey or any one of those countries where there's been disturbances going on. I think that's going to be a theme as we go forward in a lot of economic forecast and a lot of forecast by brokerage firms. But I think there's a way to work it and work it correctly. I think the supercycle has been a theme I've talked about for 7 years. I think it's here. I think it's real. I think there's setbacks going on. But in reality, when you look at what happened from 1870 to 1915 with consumer incomes, and think about that being applied to the rest of the world, it's a powerful growth that's coming. It makes sense. Anyway, I want to wrap that up. I want to move on. I want to introduce my guest today. My guest is Mike Elliott from Rocket Dog. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with your background.
Grew up South Florida, small town, moving into a big city, which was really fun and awesome and challenging all at the same time. Moved to Seattle in early 96, probably July. So right in the middle of the internet boom. And so you want to talk about some drastic change and growth and wages and all that kind of good stuff. That was certainly a big time here in Seattle.
And it's continuing.
We've seen our ups and downs for sure. I mean, I started my business in 2000, which is one of those bubbles that you mentioned about bursting a while ago. We've been fortunate enough to have been, financially positive most all of our lives, unlike a lot of companies that have come and gone during that time. But yeah, there's certainly been some drastic change in this town, and right now is certainly one of those times.
So give us a brief overview of what Rocket Dog is. Let's get this in before the commercial break.
Oh, sure. We're a full-service design and marketing firm, so what we do at our core is really help companies to build and establish a brand that helps them deliver on their brand promise to their customers and builds that loyalty over time. And, of course, at the end of the day, helps a price premium for them as well.
So a price and volume premium.
It can be. The volume for them mostly is about the volume of trust. So, yeah, I'm going to sell more products, but if my products happen to be a little bit more expensive than the neighbors, then you're probably okay with that based on the brand that we build for them.
So you got started in 2000, and you got started in a big office, or how did you get started?
Oh, like a lot of entrepreneur types, that second bedroom became the first office. I started my business with my wife at the time, and she was the one who really kind of kicked it off. We always had a dream of running our own design firm. She's a designer as well, and I quickly became employee number one at night. because both being designers, you always need a little help out from time to time, whether that's reviewing or jumping in and building logos.
So we want to hear the rest of the story. We're going to come back right after this commercial break. So don't go away. We got more to come.
More About Money coming up with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Now we return to About Money. There's more information waiting for you at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here again is your host, Mike Adams.
So I'm here with Mike Elliott of Rocket Dog. We started to talk about what Rocket Dog is, but remind us again what Rocket Dog does.
Sure, we're a full-service design and marketing firm. So at the end of the day, we build our brands for our clients. And then, for the most part, customers are both looking at print media and they're online, social media being one of the big keys today. So my job is to build a brand that kind of crosses all those boundaries.
So let's start with, what is the process for a company that comes to you and says, we need a brand, or we need to have our brand reviewed, or is our brand good?
Yeah, I think the beauty of my business is everybody's story is a little bit different, even though some of those businesses are the exact same. So for us, we look at, I always talk about what's the goals for the business, and is your brand meeting that goal or not? And sometimes it's, hey, we want to break into a new market, or we want to grow our customer base, or grow a price premium in those customer bases. And we have to really evaluate where that brand is and kind of adjust it from there. Some clients, for instance, Microsoft is one of our clients. Look, they have a great brand, and I'm not going to be changing the Microsoft brand anytime soon, but our job is to kind of come in and work with some of those sub-products, whether that's Windows or Xbox, or even down the food line of Windows Server. So in that case, our job is to extend a brand and kind of evolve it. And we believe that good design makes a difference at the end of the day, and that's kind of where we come in with some of those products.
So let's take an example case. For example, somebody comes to you. How do you sit down and talk to them about their goals?
Sure. My two questions right out of the gate is always goals and budget. And getting those two to line up depends on whether we can both be successful or not, which kind of leads to the third question, and what does success look like to you? I know what it looks like to me, but you may have a different process. Maybe yours is just, I need to acquire as many users as possible. So for instance, in today's world where there's a lot of apps being created by a variety of customers, one of their main challenges is we need funding to really take our app to the next level. And a lot of the VCs, they're really just looking at traffic. How many users do you have? So sometimes when we come in and start designing, whether it's a website or some interfaces for some of those guys and girls, it's really about lead acquisition. How quickly can we get that brand out there and get people to interact with it and fill out a form and get to using it?
So what type company or what size company would generally be using your services? So
we kind of, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, kind of that mid to large company. We are, on a scale from 1 to 10, we're probably in that 4 to 7 range when it comes to price points for customers. So as much as I love big brands like Coke and all those kind of good guys, I don't think that, since Coke really is Atlanta at the end of the day, I don't think the president of Coke is going to be calling me to redo the Coke logo and that international presence. But that kind of second tier work that they do for those guys and kind of the sub brands is where we really come in. And we're really known for understanding what a corporate brand's all about and then putting some extra, what I call creative love to it. Not all corporate brands have to be boring. And that's one of the things the challenges that I love to take on and really infuse some new creativity into.
So let's talk a little bit about, I don't know, a hypothetical company or a regular company. How does somebody know if their brand is good or bad? when, they have done work, they've developed a website, they've developed a logo, and they did that a number of years ago. How do they know when they need to make a change?
Most of the people don't, which is part of the interesting conundrum in my business. It's small things, right? Meaning, hey, I don't have enough people buying my stuff. I don't have enough reach, or a competitor is really starting to beat me on multiple levels, or someone new has come into the space and really kind of shook things up. I mean, think about the Ubers and the Lyfts compared to taxis, right? So that's a prime example where taxis just assumed that their business would continue on. It took them a very long time to actually come up with an app that you can use. Now, there's a variety of reasons why people like Uber and Lyft over taxis, but that's an example where that business had customers, didn't want to change because they thought everything was okay, whereas other companies kind of come in, they get it, and they kind of start to move forward. For the most part, a website, for instance, especially in today's world, you need to update your site about once every 3 years in today's world, at the least, simply because, responsive web design, which means basically your site looks great on a phone or a tablet or on your desktop, really wasn't an issue 10 years ago. And there are sometimes I will get a client that say, look, my website's fine. And I'm saying, when's the last time you updated it? Like 10 years ago. I'm like, so has your business not changed one little bit in 10 years? Oh yeah, we do a whole lot new this, and our customers are this. And is that reflected in your brand, in your collateral materials or your website? Oh no, we'll get to that. No one really uses that anyways. Well, at the end of the day, they do. And it's really about checking the trust. So if you say you're awesome and fantastic, the chance of me buying your services right there, sometimes are yes, most of the time no. The web is the first stop of all of those people. They're going to go back, they're going to look, they're going to read, they're going to maybe price compare to something else. And if you're not ready for that, the chances of you missing out on that customer are pretty good.
So you think that people need to start looking at it once every 3 years or so?
I think they need to look at it at least once a year to just really see what's going on. I mean, at the pace of technology, so social media we talked about, there's a lot of companies that don't do social media. They're just like, no, my clients are not there. I mean, one of our clients, for instance, BMC Software down out of Houston, we were brought onto that account through something else that we did for somebody else. And look, it's an older company, tons of money, big databases were their business. Lots of consultants all over the country. And our client brought us in to prove that social media could work for them. We had 90 days, which is fun, by the way, to prove to a company that social media works. So they gave us a product, kind of like saying, I'll give you Word out of the Microsoft plethora of products. You have 90 days to show me that social media works. We did about a 9,600% increase in traffic just on this one product, which, by the way, was workload automation, not the sexiest thing on the planet. But it was great. And so I had to go down and speak to their sales conference, which was about 2,500 consultants. So I'm in a room or an auditorium, whatever you want to call it, with a bunch of people that said, I mean, I asked for how many of you guys have social media accounts? I think 10%. Talked to a couple one-on-one, and I asked a guy about some of his accounts, and I went and followed them that night at hotel room. Came back and said, hey, you guys know they're up for review about so-and-so. He's like, how do you know that? I've been calling on those guys for 6 months. Said their tech guy just put it up on social media about a week ago. He's like, oh my God, really? I'm like, it's not about always interacting and being super active on social media. Sometimes for businesses, it's really about listening and seeing what's going on and then taking the next step forward. So that's why I say you really kind of have to stay on top of it. And even if you are successful, I think that's fantastic. To stay successful, you have to keep moving. It's kind of like being a shark, right? As a business owner, I never can stop. I would love to, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
And the world is changing so much faster now.
It's crazy. I mean, you talked about people all over the world and incomes and economies and how that's really changed in the United States versus international. Today, for instance, I just had a product delivered that I worked with somebody overseas last night. So I set up a design, something really simple, nothing too big, but set up design, spec'd it out, gave the guy what he needed to have, and this morning I had the stuff that I needed to do, and I was good to go. Now, with that being said, I don't always use an offshore development. Me personally, I haven't had the best experience with it, but we are in a global economy for pretty much anything you want to do, and sometimes that's really hard for people. Is for a lot of people, depending on what you want to do. And think of your brand the same way, right? The world doesn't stop moving. Your brand shouldn't either. I mean, even Coke, even the most recognized brand on the planet, still to this day has to create innovative ways to say that there's still something you need to pay attention to.
And still, they're not doing all that well either.
It's crazy. I mean, you talk about brands and, Swedish hospital, someone local, for instance, everybody says that they're the number one hospital to go to. And I will always ask the question, why is that? Why do you think that? Well, that's just what it is. They have the best doctors. Like, don't you think the other hospitals have great doctors? The answer is they all do. Swedish just happens to spend more marketing dollars than most hospitals in the area. So, top of mind, who comes to mind? Swedish. And not to knock those guys do a great job over there.
So if someone wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
There's a couple different ways to do it. You can certainly check out our website at www.rocketdog.org, or you can send an email to info@rocketdog.org. Those are probably your best two ways to get a hold of me and the team.
Say those again.
www.rocketdog.org and info@rocketdog.org.
Well, thanks for being on the program. What you have to say is very, very important. And it is in a changing world. If businesses don't change quickly, they die.
Yeah. If you're not moving, you're moving backwards. If you're moving backwards, you might be putting your foot in the grave. I mean, it's just one of those things.
It really is. So thanks for being on.
Thanks, Mike.
Great
I really
company.
appreciate it.
So we're going to be coming to a different part of the program. Don't go away. I'm going to talk about who was the only nominee of a major political party, one of the major, a Republican or a Democrat, who not only didn't receive any electoral college votes, but he lost the election, he lost his wife, he lost his money, he lost his mind, and he lost his life. Who was that? Right after the commercial break. So don't go away. We'll be back right away.
Stay tuned. About Money returns in a moment with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
How do you picture retirement? House on the beach, small farm in the country, traveling the world with your spouse. The one thing you don't picture is running out of money. Retirement dreams are shattered all too often by poor investment choices, sending many retirees back to work. If you think the job market is tough now, try entering it after you've retired. Don't run out of money. Start planning now. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today at 206-903-1019 and learn more about how you can create wealth for retirement and probably, most importantly, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Your business leader for Seattle is 1300 KKOL.
About Money continues. Remember the website adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I want to talk about a couple things on this part of the program. 57% of people are worried they won't have enough money to finish out their lives. I want to talk about that, but before I get to that, with the conventions being over with, I thought it would be fun to look at a very unusual situation. So following the Civil War, following Abraham Lincoln's assassination, the next president who was elected was Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant had won or had been the general over the U.S. or over the Union forces who defeated the South in the Civil War. Very, very popular president. In 1872, the Democrats nominated Horace Greeley. Horace Greeley is a very famous newspaper editor. He founded the New York Tribune. He was very, very well known. And he despised Grant. He felt that Grant's administration was corrupt, which it was. He felt that the reconstruction of the South, remember this is after the Civil War, you had to reconstruct the South, which lost the war. And if you remember from your history time, they talked about the carpetbaggers, the people from the North that swept in and took advantage of the people in the South. That was the carpetbagger time. That was the reconstruction effort that was initiated by Grant, not to the advantage of the people who lived in the southern states, very much to their disadvantage. That was under Grant, and Grant was for that. Grant was an alcoholic, and he had bad morals. And Greeley detested Grant, detested him. But Grant was very, very popular with the people. Greeley had almost no chance to win the election. And to compound it even further, Greeley's wife, Molly Greeley, was on her deathbed. And Greeley, during that time, during the election time, wrote to a friend. He wrote to him, I said, I disagree with you about death. With Molly laid in the grave next week, I would follow the following week, if Molly could only die. And that was October 30th, before the vote. Or on October 30th, before the vote, Molly actually did die. And Greeley wrote on November 4th, the day before the election, I'm not dead, but the house is desolate, my future is dark, and my heart feels like a stone. On November 5th, the following day, Grant won the election in a landslide. Greeley carried just 6 states. Grant carried everything else. By mid-November, Greeley's mental condition had rapidly deteriorated, so much so that his family moved him to a sanitarium in New York. Greeley was politically and financially ruined, and on November 29th, just 3 weeks after the election, Greeley died. So that left a big question with the Electoral College votes, because Greeley had carried 6 states. That meant 66 Democrat electors had their votes to cast, and they were instructed to cast them for whoever they wanted to cast them for. Most of them chose Thomas A. Hendricks of Illinois rather than Grant. But there were 3 Georgia electors who insisted that they wanted to vote for Greeley. Congress passed a resolution that said they could not vote for Greeley. Greeley could not have any votes. He was dead. So in 1 month, Greeley lost his wife, he lost the election, he lost all of his money, he lost his mind, he lost his own life, and he became the only presidential candidate from a major party to receive 0 electoral college votes. And now you know the rest of the story. Almost like a Paul Harvey kind of thing, huh? Greeley was 61 and out of money. And that's something that worries a lot of Americans. You know, going forward, people are forecasting that the rate of return for the stock market is going to be 3.5% to 4%. That has been forecast now for a number of sources, and that's supposed to last for the next decade or 2 decades. Bond yields are low. Financial planning, I've talked about the math. When you add cash, bonds, and stocks all together, you get a lower return. Commodities, you've heard all this before. But if stocks are 9 and 10%, when you mix them with bonds and cash, the return's going to get down into the 3 or 4%. So I believe, however, that we live in a super cycle. And we're going through a very, very difficult time. That was what I talked about during the first part of the program. I believe that we're going to see consumer incomes increase significantly across the world, and that will drive the super cycle. When I started my my business back in 1986 when I licensed, I was a stock jockey. And what that meant is I would build stock positions, sell the stock positions, buy a new stock. It was a transaction type business. And I began to change that to a fee-based business. I began to change in 1991. I opened my first account actually on December 31st, 1990. Began to transition my business to a fee-based, charging a fee based on the number of assets in the account. The idea was I had an incentive to see accounts grow. And I have seen the accounts grow. You can check my website and see what the returns have been. But that was the type of thing that we're doing. But I want to announce something new. The Custom Portfolio Incentive Program. Because now I'm willing to bet in a big way that we're going to have very good returns. I'm willing to now do a profit sharing type plan where I take 20% of the profits, but only the profits. So if returns are 3.5% to 4%, my share of the profits become 0.7 to 0.8%. Right now, for a $500,000 account, I'm charging 3%. If that account produces only a 4% return, it would be 0.8%. But if it produces a 15% return, it's 3%. And if it produces 20%, it's 4%. So I'm willing to do a profit sharing thing. I don't know of many people that are willing to go that far to see how well they do. So that means if my clients lose money, they don't pay me anything. If we make money, we do. That's the concept. It's something totally new. I haven't talked to anybody about this except an attorney to set this up. If you'd like to know more about it, contact me at Adams Financial Concepts. You can do it by email, mike@adamsfinancialconcepts.com. You can call me at 206-903-1019, or you can check the website and contact us through that. This is something completely new, a complete thing. I believe that we're going in the super cycle, and we're going to see some really great returns. That wraps it up for today. If you're worried about running out of money, we're done. Oh, we've still got a minute to go. I thought we were all done. Okay. So if you're worried about running out of money, we have some thoughts about that as well. And a lot of people are concerned about running out of money. And if returns are 3.5% or 4%, it's going to make a very big difference if you're focusing on that kind of return or if you're looking at significantly higher returns. Talk to me. We've got a lot to talk about. And until next week, have a very great week. Have a very warm week. And I'll be back on Friday to talk about money.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you want Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Friday afternoon at 3 for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL.
The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
1300 KKOL.